All right, guys, we're back in the Ad and Adventures office here again with Justin Kinney. I'm Adonis Acuario. We're going to talk about another topic around rosters and lineups as it relates to USTA teams. And of course, we've got an expert here talking about everything associated with USTA and getting to nationals.
He's saying that's all me already, but it's really a lot of this captains definitely would not be in the position I am without them. Oh, I almost forgot. Red Bull gives you wings.
Horrible.
Oh man. Okay, we'll work on the sponsorships.
Actually, you already do something with Yonex. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Oh, I can't.
Oh my God.
No, don't worry. I don't sign that contract until potentially fall.
Okay.
So, we're good.
TBD.
We're good.
I'll cut that out.
So yes, going back into teams and success, it is funny because we have been to almost coming up on 50 playoff events, getting closer to 30 sectional events. We just capped off at 10 national events. That does include 55 plus, senior mixed, 1 doubles, 4-5, 2-5, all across the board. I even had one 40 plus team. They're finally like, oh, we finally made sectionals. We're the only ones that of all your teams that haven't made it. And we finally broke that. I'm just very fortunate to work with some amazing captains. They're the real cogs in the machine that help bring everything together here.
You obviously see a lot of students at different levels trying to focus on very different things, but collectively you've created some very strong competitive teams that have made it far. So how do you think about that in the context of the rosters that you have available to you?
I explain to people, like, if you're putting together a championship team, starts way before the season starts.
Yeah.
It's almost always at the end of like the previous season. You got that one player, you got that captain that's like, I'm hungry. They tasted a little bit of success and like, I want to reach a little higher. You got to start like a year ahead,
Yeah.
A little under the table deals, shaking hands, saying, hey, I'm going to steal that top player from that team.
Yeah, horrible.
Hey, but that's what it takes.
Obviously, I've captained a lot of teams too. Not as many as you've coached, but putting together a solid roster and just trying to figure out who works together, like the last time we spoke about, can be quite difficult to do everything before we actually step on court and start competing.
Yeah. So like to that point, when we're talking about like depth of roster for the 18 plus, 2 singles and 3 doubles, that means to be competitive at any level, you really need 3 singles players that can rotate in and out throughout the season. At least like 1 or 2 hybrid players. That's what we call them, where they're strong enough that they could switch between singles or doubles. That's how you kind of have to think of everything. Like you can't have anyone that you can't count on throughout the entire roster, right? You have to have like 5 solid doubles pairs where that third pair is interchangeable with anyone else that's coming off your bench.
How do we decide generally who's going to play in which position? So how do you tend to think about that?
I've seen a team, they did rock, paper, scissors to decide court positions, and other teams, they'll actually like scrimmage and they'll do a full team ladder and they'll do like a point system where it's like they play with each partner and then whoever has the most points together. And I'm like, and you can do anything in between. And I think that's part of like the overall success is like I'm pretty flexible. I don't say here's one system that I've done and it works. It's, hey, this is like your team is a little bit more happy-go-lucky and we happen to be very strong, but we're not going to put pressure and say, hey, you're always a court 1 doubles because that's your position. You're the best. That kind of team is more like, hey, like who wants to play court 1 this week? Who wants a little bit more of a challenge? And then you have other teams where they need that kind of very stringent system where they understand it gives them focus every time they go out there, where it's like, hey, I understand why I'm here and I'm doing this role because my team needs me to be. And in those situations, that's also where we kind of briefly talked about this before, but flipping lineups. We've all been there, done that, been like the sacrifice player. That's one of my only like 0-0 losses in USTA. I was a sacrifice singles player for my own team. It's understanding, hey, you know what? It's nothing personal. It's just we want to make sure that we win 3 out of 5 courts, and we're against a very tough team. So we're going to do whatever we can to get that win.
Yeah, I think it starts early, right? Like you're saying, the first thing that I like to discuss, and we've discussed this too, and I've discussed this with other coaches that I've been with in the past that I've captained with, and it's first determining what's the goal of the team. Is the team goal to go to nationals? Do they want to be competitive? Another goal could just be, you know what, like I just want to play. I want play time. I want the opportunity to be challenged on court. Another goal is really just more social.
Maybe drink a little bit.
And drink a little bit, or a lot.
Or a lot.
Just to socialize, right? And have big feasts and have a good time. So I think it really starts out with just what's the goal of the team to help determine how do we think about those lineups? Because you just mentioned a few that I think are valid. If you don't necessarily care about advancing, then yeah, like rock, paper, scissors sometimes makes sense. Right? Like it's
let fate decide.
Let fate decide. And yet some do it more strategically, right? They do want to go to nationals and they use the rock, paper, scissors technique and, for a variety of different reasons.
I think one of the most important aspects of this is managing the expectations. And when I first started coaching, I had this really amazing 3-5 women's team. We made it all the way to sectionals. But on the way, the team had transformed from a brand new team, like, hey, we're going to try to do well, we're going to have fun, to, oh, we're going to make playoffs. Oh, we're going to win playoffs. Oh, we're going to go to sectionals.
And that happened over time?
Yeah, and it happened over time. And definitely younger in my coaching career, I didn't feel comfortable stepping in as much. They didn't have a meeting mid-season to say, hey, everyone heads up. We're switching gears because we're going to come through this in first place.
Yeah.
A lot of people still were like under the impression going towards the end of the season, we're all going to get even play time. We're all going to get like a chance to play whatever we want. And that stopped happening. We started putting in our strongest lineup.
Yep.
Some people got really pissed and they didn't come back. There's a couple partnerships that are no longer, they don't play together anymore. Never an easy conversation, but it's so important. Like now I preface it. Anytime I think a team's going to be competitive, I tell the captain before the season starts, before you add somebody on the roster, you tell them, I'm not going to guarantee playtime.
Yeah.
I'm not going to guarantee what you want. I'll even talk to players that want to join a competitive team to help manage that expectation. I'll say, you're new to this roster. I'm not going to promise match time. You might get to. Like, there's one woman, she joined our team. She ended up playing 7 of the 9 matches.
Yeah.
Right. And she was brand new to the team. She's not the strongest player. She's a good player. But there are definitely more stronger players on that roster. She got to play a lot, but the promise I made to her joining the team was, you're going to get to practice with us. You're going to scrimmage with these ladies. We're going to develop you more. So like by next year, you're pretty much a guaranteed starter.
Yeah.
Like that's just definitely something that I take pride in. Like if somebody's willing to jump in on our system, it's like I know I can develop them and get them to the point where they are more of a starter. It's the worst thing you can do is just say, hey, we're a happy-go-lucky team. We're all going to party. And then midway through the season, sorry, you don't get to play anymore because we don't think you're strong enough.
Yeah. And I think a good example of that, just to kind of bring it to what we've done recently, was our 3-5 men's team. Just to give everybody a little bit of a background, Justin and I, which we had never really captained and coached together on a USTA team, but we decided to form an Add-in Adventures team. And in that season, I was very clear with the rest of the team, we're going to try and be competitive. Everybody was hitting really great. You had some awesome singles players coming in. And we thought, yeah, like we could be super competitive. It didn't turn out that way. And then we changed goals mid-season. It was now like, okay, let's give everybody an opportunity to get a win. Everybody needs to experience a win at least once in that season. Let's get good playing time for everybody, and let's try and get singles players in that wanted to play singles, because we obviously had a lot of singles players in that team.
Sometimes you might be the best hitter, but you might not understand how to play the game, or like what is your composure and mental fortitude on court during a match versus in practice. Like we have a lot of good ball strikers. The issue is like half of our roster had never played a USTA match before.
Right, yeah.
Right, some of them have not played a match in more than a decade.
Yeah. And if we were to look at some of our initial pairings, right, we tried to take that into consideration, which was, let's go ahead and try and find some people that had played USTA in the past, like myself, and pair them with people that hadn't, so that we can have at least a strong start of experience on court while still being able to leverage those skills. And that didn't work.
Because somebody got injured?
I did get injured, guys. I don't know. Maybe I'll share some of that video later. It can't just be based off of the lineup, I guess is my point. We can't just put all of our faith in the lineup and the skills of the individual players. It's the combination of the pairs. It's the flight that we're in, and the quality of the competition going in. So let's talk about stacking lineups, right? So the
Flip.
the flip of the lineup in a way that can be advantageous or can really screw us over, which it definitely has in the past. First, I don't know, can you just explain what stacking a lineup means?
For USTA, if it's a 3-5 team, everyone's technically around a 3-5, so there is no court 1, 2, or 3. Everyone's supposed to be relatively the same level, so you don't have to play the strongest team on court 1. It's always this like funny rock, paper, scissors thing going on. I try to pay not that much heed into it. For example, there's 2 singles players.
Yeah.
There's a hard hitter on court 1 and a pusher on court 2. And so we want to match up our pusher to, their hard hitter and flip it. But then if we flip it and then they flip it, then it all cancels
each other out.
You know, I'll make fun of you sometimes because you look at their history and you're like, well, they flipped this team to court 3 every time they came up against a good team.
Yeah.
Like a lot of times we just put in whoever's available. Yes, you try to make the best pairings out of who's available. And so during the summer, our availability is hectic. Usually I recommend keeping larger rosters.
Right.
So you really don't know who the other team is going to bring, right? Like, oh man, if they have all 6 of their top players, we're screwed.
Right.
Right. And it turns out like all 6 of them are gone. Or you imagine that, hey, this one pair's been playing 1 doubles the entire season. Their captain isn't going to message me and be like, hey, by the way, our number 1 double is out this weekend.
Right, of course.
So you prepare for it and then they're not there. The only difference potentially is postseason because everyone's probably set aside time for that. And so you can kind of scout out a little bit if that gives you a better idea.
I tend to do a lot of analysis, especially at the beginning of the season, because I want to kind of see and align our goals with what I expect to be able to put up in the lineup throughout the rest of the season, right? Because you can look at enough information, history about certain types of players to be able to say, you know what, like this match and this match are probably going to be our toughest matches. These are going to be moderately difficult. So I think it makes sense in the context of like planning for the rest of the season because you're right, like availability is horrible. I had a team once that we had, I think, 22 players and we just couldn't field a lineup for 3 courts. Like it's ridiculous.
Yeah. Sometimes you get blessed by a good schedule.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just get completely screwed over.
Right.
One thing I do take pride in is you can ask any of my teams and they will say they got better as the season went on. And whether that's not just like the coaching we're doing, but like if they're really on a roll, they'll start scrimmaging more. They'll start putting into practice. They'll go out and drill with each other, just rally. Like they build and they build and they build. But it sucks because what if the 3 hardest teams in your bracket happen to be your first 3 matches?
Yeah.
Right? Like hopefully it's like you're building up to them so you play the toughest teams at the end of the season. And so you're kind of peaking right at the end.
Yeah. And like you said, it's because you're able to improve. You're able to get that experience over the course of the season. But yeah, like in our 3-5 men's team, just really tough, especially at the start of the season where we were facing some of the toughest teams. And it hits morale, right? Like people start to realize that it's going to be a tough season.
Not as good.
That we're not as good as we thought they were. Yeah. And then you have times where like you look at it and you think, you know what? Like we're in a really good draw. Like we have a really good chance at this. Let's not screw it up with dumb lineups.
There's this doubles pair. They're retired now. They're called the Bryan brothers. I don't know if you've ever heard of them.
I've heard of them. Excellent.
Whoever was playing better that day, they got to call the shot. And so they took away the ego. They didn't let their personality get in front of it. It was more about saying, hey, you know what? You're playing really good tennis today. So I'm going to let you call the shots. I'm going to let you call like what you want to do. And so sometimes I have to just look at that and like sometimes it's the fairest thing to do is just to say, hey, you know what? You've been stronger than everyone else this whole season, but right now they're playing really good tennis.
Would you ever change a lineup based off of the quality of the hitting in the warm-ups?
I don't want to judge it just on the warm-ups. Because some people like warm up really slow. Some people warm up really quickly. Like that's a hard judgment piece. Like we talked about, so I said ladders. Sometimes that's like the fairest thing to do. You can't just do one ladder at the beginning of the season. You got to do it like school teams do it. You got to be like, hey, you know what? You won your last match, which means you get to challenge the next team up. And so that hopefully keeps them hungry. The only thing I see the downside of doing that kind of system, you're kind of making it like a dog-eat-dog world. You don't want your teammates like button heads against each other.
Do you have a lot of teams that do that? Because I'd consider it for a lot of my own personal teams. Yeah, there's a bit of pressure that's associated with it when, like I said, like I watch them scrimmage a lot and you watch them train during training a lot. And I feel like you and I can have a good enough discussion to be able to determine the quality of that individual's abilities to be able to play competitively during a match, as opposed to let's just do it based off of the numbers. Just let's do the ladder
Yeah.
and see how they perform. Like, do you have a lot of teams that do ladders for choosing lineups?
No, not currently. The captains will report the scrimmage scores to me. So like it's not as visual to everyone, but then it's like, it just helps me. If anybody ever wants to ask, then I can be like, well, you know, you lost to so-and-so and that's why they're playing right now.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's so important to not be anecdotal. Here's the hard numbers. It's not opinion. It's just, hey, they beat you at the last scrimmage. It does lead back to what we talked about, like managing those expectations. If at the beginning of the season you say, hey, we're not going to take it personally, we're not going to let our ego or get in front of it, but this ladder system is just to help us, and you make it as fair as possible. You know, you say, hey, if you won your last scrimmage against a team, then you get to challenge whichever team that you want, you know, and you can make it fair like that. And hope that sometimes it almost encourages people to do it. I've just also seen teams where that's how they strictly did it, but then it became like daggers in the back, ragging on each other, like, oh man, like she's such a dirty cheater. And I'm like, why would you say that about your teammate? She hooks me every single time. And it's like, okay, but what about if you guys have to pair together? You know, like, how are you gonna feel in that moment? I've seen all the extreme ends, and it is kind of figuring out what works for your roster or what works for your team dynamic.
And how can you tell that? Because again, like I put that pressure on as the captain, as opposed to letting the team determine what that goal and that, you know, the spirit of the team should be as best as I can. Does it start with a captain, or does it start with just kind of looking at the team?
No, I definitely think it starts with the captain. Like, I just texted a captain, hey, don't worry about tomorrow's lineup. Just send out what I sent you. I honestly do believe the captains have almost a better feel on the individual's personality. Sometimes I don't even get to see their competitive personality. I just get to see what they look like in practice, or like those brief scrimmages, versus like you guys, I think, are actually the ones that have more of a dialogue with them, right? You have a better sense of like, he's stressed out from work, and you get a better feel for that, because a lot of times, like when they come on court with me, they're going to try to put on their best face. And I do, like, I feel like I do a pretty good job of reading that, like the energy that they can bring. But it's definitely, I think, more also like you guys as the captains that do such an amazing job of reading what how they're feeling and those kind of interactions, and like I said, personality.
So what's your takeaway when you think about lineups? What do you want to tell people?
The lineups, you know, like whenever we're moving things around, I think it's so important to remember the captains and coaches have the best intentions. We truly, like, I don't ever really believe in a sacrifice player. I know, like, I've been there, but like at the same time, if you're talking about the cogs to make like a winning machine here, it's like, hopefully everyone's a team player and they're not putting that pressure back on the captain or complaining, because, you know, it's a lot of times we do the best that we can given who's available.